laid in the glass-walled conference room. CEO Alexander Reed appeared to be asleep. Her head rested against the back of a leather sofa, one arm loosely draped across a stack of merger documents scattered across the polished table. The overhead lights had been dimmed, leaving only the city's glow filtering through 43 stories of smoked glass. But Alexandra Reed was not asleep. She was testing someone, specifically the night shift janitor, Carter Williams. She had remained in conference room B long after the rest of the executive floor emptied out. The merger due diligence team from Cascade Holdings would arrive in 72 hours, and the entire Reed Dynamics tower had to be flawless. Every system, every document, every detail. But Alexander believed something else as well. People behaved differently when they thought no one important was watching. And tonight, she wanted to see who Carter Williams really was. Outside, rain swept across Seattle's waterfront. The November storm rattled softly against the glass walls of the tower, turning the city lights into blurred streaks of color. Reed Dynamics rose like a steel needle above the harbor, a monument to logistics, precision, and ruthless efficiency. Alexander Reed had built it that way. At 34, she was the youngest CEO to run a major logistics firm in the Pacific Northwest. Her calendar was carved into 15-minute blocks. Her reputation had been forged in earnings calls, negotiations, and boardroom battles where hesitation meant defeat. Her philosophy was simple: trust no one until they prove they deserve it. But beneath the armor of discipline and control lay something far more fragile. 7 years earlier, Alexander had been in New York closing a deal when her mother collapsed in a Seattle hospital. A heart attack. By the time Alexandra's plane landed, the hospital room was empty, machines silent, sheets folded. She had arrived 90 minutes too late. That moment carved a permanent scar in her life. Since then, sleep had felt like weakness, like the moment you lowered your guard and lost what mattered most. So her office light was always the last one glowing in the tower, and tonight was no exception. Carter Williams pushed his cleaning cart quietly down the 15th floor corridor. The wheels squeaked softly against the polished tile. At 35, Carter had the broad shoulders of someone used to heavy work and the quiet posture of a man who preferred to remain unnoticed, which suited the job. In a building full of executives and analysts, janitors were part of the background, seen but rarely acknowledged. Carter didn't mind. 3 years earlier, his life had been something entirely different. He had been an aviation maintenance technician, responsible for inspecting turbine assemblies and hydraulic systems. Precision work, the kind where a missed detail could cost lives. Then came the house fire, a faulty smoke detector. 1 minute. That was the difference between life and death. Carter had arrived home 1 minute too late to save his wife, Vivian. The fire department called it tragic timing. Carter called it failure. At Vivian's grave, beneath cold rain and gray sky, he made a promise. He would never let anyone be alone again. Not if he could help it. Not ever. Now he moved quietly through Reed Dynamics each night, doing a job no one noticed but everyone depended on. His 8-year-old daughter Lily waited downstairs most evenings in the security office, coloring at a small desk beside the night guard. She was bright, observant, and strangely perceptive about the world. More than once she had noticed details adults overlooked. Carter liked to think she inherited that from her mother. Upstairs, Alexandra lay motionless on the sofa. At exactly 10:15 p.m., Carter entered the conference room. His cart carried the usual supplies: microfiber cloths, glass cleaner, disinfectant spray, and a checklist he followed with quiet precision. He wiped down the table first, then the chairs, then the glass panels. Routine, methodical, reliable. He checked outlets for loose wiring, adjusted the floor mat near the doorway so no one would trip. Only then did he notice Alexandra. She appeared asleep, her breathing slow, her posture relaxed in a way she never allowed during the day. Carter recognized her immediately. Alexandra Reed, the CO, the woman employees described as brilliant, demanding, and nearly impossible to impress. But right now, something about her seemed different, vulnerable. The crease between her eyebrows remained even in sleep, like tension had become permanent. Carter glanced at the thermostat. The room was cold Corporate buildings always overcompensated at night. His eyes moved to the worn canvas jacket hanging from his cart. He hesitated. That jacket was one of the few decent things he owned. Bought secondhand after making sure Lily had everything she needed for school. Still, after a moment's pause, he lifted it and gently draped it across Alexandra's shoulders. She didn't move. Carter stepped back. Then something else happened. Something that would change everything. He leaned slightly closer and whispered words he had repeated many times in the quiet darkness of his home. Words meant for someone who was no longer there. "I couldn't save my wife," he murmured softly, "but I won't let anyone be alone again." The words barely left his lips when Alexandra's eyes snapped open. Not groggy, not confused, instantly alert. Her heart pounded as she stared at him. Carter froze, startled. For several seconds, neither spoke. Rain tapped against the glass. Finally, Alexandra sat up slowly, the jacket sliding from her shoulders before she caught it. It was still warm. "Thank you," she said quietly. Carter straightened. "Sorry, ma'am. Didn't mean to wake you. I'll finish up and get out of your way." He returned to cleaning. But Alexandra barely noticed. Her mind was replaying the whisper she had just heard. "I couldn't save my wife." The weight of that sentence struck something deep inside her chest, a wound she rarely allowed herself to remember. For the rest of the evening, she said nothing. She simply watched. Later that night, Alexandra sat alone in her office on the 40th floor. The city lights flickered below like scattered stars. On her computer screen was Carter Williams's personnel file. Single parent. Hired 3 years ago. Perfect attendance. No disciplinary issues. No commendations either. After all, no one wrote praise reports for janitors. Alexandra leaned back in her chair, thinking about the whisper, about the promise, about the quiet compassion in the voice of a man who believed no one was listening. The next morning, she made a decision that surprised even herself. She called Carter Williams into her office. Carter stepped into the sleek executive space cautiously. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Seattle's harbor. The desk alone probably cost more than his car. Alexandra didn't waste time. "I need someone to run a safety inspection of this building," she said. "The due diligence team arrives in 48 hours. You move through the tower more than anyone else. You see things others miss." Carter blinked. "I'm not an inspector, ma'am." "You were an aviation maintenance technician," Alexandra replied calmly. "Yes." "Then you know how to detect problems before they become disasters." She slid a tablet across the desk. "I want a full report. Electrical, mechanical, structural concerns. Everything. 48 hours. Carter looked down at the tablet, unsure why she trusted him with something so important. But he also knew one thing about machines. If something was wrong, ignoring it never made it better. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Good," Alexandra replied. "Report only to me." As Carter left, Serena Park watched the interaction from across the office floor. Serena was Reed Dynamics' head of human resources, and she was very good at reading people. Something unusual had just happened. The CEO had placed trust in someone no one else in the building even noticed. Serena quietly made a mental note. Something had shifted, and she intended to find out why. That night, Carter began the inspection. Breaker panels, power monitors, maintenance logs, everything. At first, the systems looked normal, but the deeper he looked, the stranger the data became. Energy usage reports looked almost too perfect. Floors listed as vacant were still drawing power. Certain systems showed unusual spikes during late-night hours, and the official monitoring system smoothed those spikes away like they had never existed. Carter frowned. Machines didn't lie, but data could, and someone, somewhere in this building, had clearly been manipulating it. He just didn't know why. Yet, over the next 2 nights, Carter Williams moved through Reed Dynamics Tower with a level of focus he hadn't felt in years. He treated the building the same way he once treated aircraft engines. Carefully, methodically, nothing taken at face value, nothing ignored. He began with the basement mechanical rooms, where the building's power infrastructure lived behind rows of metal cabinets and humming transformers. Breaker panels were labeled, Voltage monitors blinked steadily. At first glance, everything appeared normal. But Carter had spent years diagnosing problems that didn't want to be found. And something here didn't feel right. He compared the live energy consumption readings to the official facility database. The numbers didn't match. Not by a small margin. Floor 12, listed as vacant for renovations, was still drawing significant power late at night. 17 kilowatts. Enough to run several large systems. Yet access logs showed no authorized personnel entering the floor during those hours. Carter frowned. That alone would have raised questions. But it got worse. The backup power system showed brief voltage spikes that disappeared in the official reports. Not erased. Smoothed. As if someone had programmed the building's monitoring software to massage the numbers into acceptable ranges. That wasn't a glitch. That was intentional. 2 nights later, Carter discovered the first piece of physical evidence. It was inside a junction box in the basement mechanical room. The cover screws had fresh marks. Someone had opened it recently. Inside, he found new solder joints connecting wires that didn't belong in the original design. A small bypass circuit had been installed. It rerouted energy readings through a modified signal processor before they reached the monitoring system, meaning the real consumption numbers were being altered before anyone could see them. Carter stared at the circuit board. Someone had deliberately modified the building's electrical reporting system, and they'd done it recently. A firmware update sticker attached to the control module was dated 3 weeks earlier. The technician's signature didn't match anyone in the official facilities roster. That meant someone with administrative system access had authorized a change, which narrowed the list dramatically. That night, Lily was with him. She sat cross-legged on the floor of the mechanical room, drawing quietly in her sketchbook while Carter worked. She liked coming to the tower. The hallways were big and quiet. The machines hummed like distant music. She drew what she saw. Panels, lights, cables. When Carter finished examining the junction box, Lily held up her drawing. "Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart." "Why is that light blinking?" Carter glanced at the sketch. In the corner of the control panel, Lily had drawn a tiny red indicator. Blink, pause, blink, pause. None of the other lights blinked. Only that one. Carter turned back to the panel. Sure enough, the indicator light pulsed in the exact pattern she had drawn. It only activated when the bypass circuit engaged, meaning whenever the system falsified the data, that tiny light blinked. His 8-year-old daughter had just spotted the physical signal of an ongoing fraud. Carter smiled faintly. "Good catch," she said. By the end of the inspection, Carter had assembled a full report. Energy logs, access logs, photographs of the bypass circuit, firmware records showing unauthorized system updates. The conclusion was simple and devastating. The building's energy consumption had been artificially manipulated. The real numbers were 18% higher than the sustainability reports filed for the merger, which meant the ESG metrics presented to Cascade Holdings were false. If auditors discovered the discrepancy, the entire merger could collapse. At 6 a.m., Carter delivered the report personally. Alexandra Reed had just arrived at the building, coffee in hand and exhaustion lining her face. She read the documents in silence, page by page. Her expression slowly hardened. "Who else knows?" she asked. "No one," Carter replied. "You said report to you only." Alexandra nodded slowly. "This could destroy the merger." "Yes, ma'am. It could cost people their jobs." "I know." She looked at him carefully. "Why bring this to me?" Carter hesitated. Images flashed through his mind. Smoke, sirens, a silent house where Vivian should have been. "Because someone needs to know," he said quietly. "And because you asked." The room fell silent. Alexandra stared at the documents again. She had 2 choices: bury the evidence, close the deal, collect the bonuses and fix the problem later, or expose the truth and risk everything. She thought about her mother, about arriving 90 minutes too late, about Carter's whisper in the conference room. "I couldn't save my wife." Alexandra closed the report. "We go with the truth," she said. "Prepare full backups of those logs. If this explodes, we'll need proof that stands up in court." But the moment she chose the truth, resistance began. That afternoon, Chief Financial Officer Henry Cole appeared in her office. His smile was tight. "I hear you've been running some extra audits," he said casually. "Anything I should be worried about?" "Just due diligence," Alexander replied calmly. Henry nodded slowly. "Well, sometimes these systems show minor discrepancies. Better to resolve those after the deal closes." Minor discrepancies. They both knew the phrase was meaningless. The data Carter found wasn't minor. It was criminal. That evening, Zane Miller requested dinner. He took Alexandra to an upscale steakhouse downtown. Soft lighting, expensive wine, the kind of place where billion-dollar deals were quietly finalized. Zane leaned back in his chair. "You're digging into the building systems," he said, "which means you're going to find things." Alexander said nothing. "But the question isn't what you find," he continued. "It's what serves the greater good. 800 employees depend on this company. Sometimes the right decision is finishing the deal." It was a seductive argument. Protect jobs. Protect stability. Ignore the uncomfortable details. Alexandra nearly believed it. But then she thought about Carter, about promises kept. "I'll think about it," she said. Zane smiled. "Of course." Meanwhile, Serena Park had been conducting her own quiet investigation. An anonymous envelope appeared in her office mailbox. Inside were copies of contractor invoices, payments made to a consulting company named Energy Systems Optimization. The owner? Henry Cole's brother-in-law. The payment dates aligned perfectly with the unauthorized firmware update. Serena forwarded the documents to Alexandra with a short message. "You need to see this." That night, Alexandra made her decision final. She texted Carter. "Prepare to restore the system to factory settings. Full log backup. Timestamp everything." His reply came instantly. "Understood." They worked all night. Carter, a trusted security technician. Serena coordinating legal protections. Every wire documented. Every data log copied. Every circuit photographed. Then Alexandra built the trap. Step 1. Restore accurate reporting. Step 2. Insert a digital tripwire into the system. Step 3. Wait for whoever installed the bypass circuit to try accessing it again. Lily unknowingly helped set the timing. Her drawing showed the blinking indicator activated every 73 minutes. Carter used that pattern to predict the next access attempt. 11:15 p.m., the night before the due diligence walkthrough. The trap worked. At 10:48 p.m., a fire alarm began chirping on floor 12. Smoke seeped into the hallway. Someone had pushed the overloaded transformer past its safe capacity, trying to override the restored system. Carter saw the surge in the control room. He grabbed an emergency mask and ran upstairs, against the flow of evacuating employees, into the smoke. Inside the mechanical room, he found Zane Miller, frantically trying to disconnect a jury-rigged voltage regulator. The transformer behind him glowed red-hot. Zane spun around. "This is none of your business." Carter didn't argue. He slammed the emergency cutoff switch, triggered the fire suppression system, and grabbed Zane's arm. "We're leaving." But the main stairwell was already filling with smoke. Zane panicked. His polished confidence collapsed into fear. Carter looked at him. The man responsible for fraud. The man who might destroy everything. He remembered Vivian. 1 minute too late. "I don't owe you anything." Zane coughed. "No," Carter said, "but I owe myself." Using a heavy nylon mop cord, Carter created a safety line around a steel beam. He tied the other end around both of them. Then he guided them slowly through the smoke toward the secondary exit. Alexandra appeared in the hallway, holding the fire door open. Her eyes widened as she saw Carter dragging Zane out. Together they reached the stairwell. Firefighters rushed past them moments later. Zane collapsed against the wall. Carter wiped soot from his face. "You didn't have to save him," Alexandra said quietly. Carter shook his head. "Yes, I did." Security officers detained Henry Cole shortly afterward. A USB drive containing system access logs was found in his pocket. Everything matched Carter's report. Everything matched Serena's invoices. The evidence was overwhelming. The next morning, Alexandra faced the board. She told them everything. The manipulated data. The fraudulent energy reports. The conspiracy between Henry and Zane. We could have buried this, she said calmly. But that's not the company I want to run. Profit built on deception isn't profit. It's theft. The merger was paused. Henry and Zane were placed under criminal investigation. Some board members were furious. Others were relieved. Truth was expensive, but it was necessary. That afternoon, Alexander called Carter into her office again. I want you to become Reed Dynamics Safety Systems engineer. Carter blinked. I don't have credentials. You have something better, Alexander said. Integrity. And you don't leave people behind. The position came with a real salary, flexible hours, health benefits, a future for Lily. Carter accepted quietly. 3 months later, Reed Dynamics launched the Vivian Williams Safety Fund, a nonprofit program providing free smoke detectors and safety inspections for low-income homes across Seattle. Alexandra personally funded the first 1,000 installations. The logo was designed by Lily, a small light shining in darkness. At the company's annual meeting, Alexandra told the story. She thanked Carter by name in front of 800 employees. He reminded me what integrity looks like when it costs you something. The applause lasted nearly a full minute. Carter stood quietly at the back of the room with Lily beside him. She beamed with pride. A week later, Lily held a small art show at her school. Parents and teachers walked through the classroom gallery. One drawing showed the control panel from that night, the blinking indicator glowing like a tiny star. Alexander stood in front of it for a long time, because sometimes the smallest lights reveal the biggest truths. Through the glass walls of Reed Dynamics Tower, the rain had finally stopped. The city shone clean beneath the morning sun. And for the first time in years, Alexander Reed believed something she hadn't dared believe before. That trust could be rebuilt. One promise, one choice, one act of courage at a time. And sometimes, all it took to change everything was a whisper no one was supposed to hear.